Mr. Klatzer, you think good time to get going?
Yeah, I think so. I think we can go ahead and start the evening.
Right, will do. Well, thank you to everybody for being here with us tonight. My name is Kevin Hodson. I'm the principal here at Cypress High School. We're just really happy that you're here with us tonight.
I want to wish everybody a good evening. I'm Daniel Klatzker. I'm the principal at Lexington Junior High School, and we're going to have our panelists go ahead and introduce themselves as well. We can start with our social workers at the schools.
Go ahead and introduce myself. I am Jacqueline Lopez, and I am the district social worker at Cypress High School. I'll share a little bit about my role so that you have a good understanding of what I do at Cypress High School. I support students with their social and emotional needs there at Cypress High School. Good evening to all.
Hi, everyone, and my name is Bristol Lopez. I am the district social worker assigned to Lexington, and I do also support at Oxford Academy. We are happy to have you, and like Jacqueline said, we assist in supporting the social emotional needs of the students at our sites. We also just work on advocacy, so getting the word out there about mental health awareness. So we are so excited to be with you all tonight.
And if we can have our counselor introduce herself.
Hi, I'm Brianna Plummer. I am the counselor, one of the counselors at Lexington and Cypress, so I work at both sites. And I help students with all types of things, social, emotional, and academic. I'm also really helping students with coping skills and how to get through this difficult time and this pandemic. So a lot of that, and I'm here to support your students with whatever they need.
Thank you very much. We'll go ahead in just a minute. I'll introduce our partners from Orange County Department of Education. But before we do that, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the evening and the purpose and kind of where we're at with, what we consider like kind of an ongoing goal of working with the mental health of our students. As Ms. Plummer just said, it's been a difficult year with the pandemic. We've definitely seen an upswing in crisis and have been working with a lot more students than maybe we would in a normal year. And then in light of the recent tragic event that occurred with one of our students, we just thought it would be a good time to get out in this kind of a bigger, more global type of meeting here. But I want to really stress that, we look at this as kind of like the first part, and then we'll have many, many more, chances for us to, communicate with you, work with you and so forth. So that's kind of where we're at and why we're here this evening. Really excited and thankful to our board, to Mr. Matsuda for allowing us to do this tonight. And also wanted to just add in that we have our assistant principals watching as well. And really this is a webinar format, as you know. We weren't quite sure on numbers, so we just wanted to make sure that we didn't go over a limit that we might otherwise go. But as I said, we plan on having many smaller events where there's a lot more like direct back and forth interaction. Mr. Klatzker, I'll go ahead and let you talk about some of the details of the evening.
I will share. Thank you, Dr. Hodson. And again, thank you everybody for being here tonight. We are recording this, and I'll go over some of the logistics. And like I said earlier, I'm the principal at Lexington Junior High School. Dr. Hodson and I work closely together as we serve the same communities. And so for the evening, what we're going to be doing is our Ms. Plummer is going to be putting a form in the chat box, and that is a Google form. And if you are if you're a parent of a student at Cypress or Lexington Junior High School, feel free to fill out that form if you have questions, if you need additional supports. That form will go directly to our counselors and our social workers, and they will follow up with you. And it'll be our way of making sure that we follow up with you. In addition to that, as our social workers from OCDE are speaking, you can put a question in the chat box, and we will be monitoring the chat box as well. And hopefully we'll get your questions answered as we go through the evening together. And then finally, for those of you that need interpretation, we are offering Korean and Spanish interpretation. And if you go to the bottom of your Zoom screen, there is an interpretation icon. And if you press that, we have 2 interpreters who will help you with both Korean and in Spanish. So again, thank you so much for joining us on this very important evening. We do understand the crisis that is in our community with our students. And that's why we felt it was really important for us to come out tonight and make sure that we share with you this presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Klatzker. With that, I'm going to introduce our partners from Orange County Department of Ed. Tonight we have with us Miss Jennifer Ponce and Miss Mindy Daffner. If you guys want to introduce yourselves, and feel free to take it away.
Sure, I will go ahead and share my screen and I'll introduce myself and then hand it over to Mindy. I just want to make sure everyone is able to see that. We just appreciate being able to be here this evening. I'm Jennifer Ponce. I'm the program specialist for our Crisis Response Network at the Orange County Department of Education. And if Mindy...
Sorry. And I'm Daffron. Program support. There's some feedback. So I'll stop talking so we don't get that.
Thank you, Mindy. We appreciate everyone being here with us this evening, and I'm just going to apologize up front because there is a 3-year-old out there, and I've tried my best to bribe with Mario Kart, but we'll see if that works. But we just, we definitely appreciate all of you being here, and we appreciate your leaders in Anaheim, at the school district and at Cypress and at Lexington, and for them bringing us here this evening to be able to talk to you and just share some more information about how you can support your students and your children with their own emotional and mental health, especially right now, as the principal was mentioning, definitely with COVID-19, this is a very stressful time. And then given the other incidents that have impacted our school campuses, we know that it can be really challenging. So we're gonna be here to talk a little bit about this, and we definitely welcome questions. So I'm gonna go ahead and jump right in and get started. So some of the objectives of tonight's presentation is we're going to provide an overview of trauma, the different types, what that looks like, how it might impact your student or your child. Also media, especially social media with our young kids, we know that that can have a heavy influence, and also how that can impact the trauma and the way that they experience that. We're going to talk about some common stress responses to trauma and critical incidents. We're going to cover some warning signs just to kind of help us better understand, what's normal, what's a normal response, and what's something that I should be a little bit more concerned about, or when should I look for some extra resources and support for my student. We're going to cover some best practice and some recommendations as far as like what to say and what not to say, even though instinctually there's a lot of wonderful things that we want to say to help someone cope with trauma and to process and to heal. Sometimes our words, even though they're intended to help, sometimes make it a little bit more difficult. So we'll cover some of those things. Also, how to be, that safe adult in their life. We'll talk about some self-care. Of course, COVID-19, and another thing that we are going to cover a little bit of is some suicide prevention information. So to get started, here's just a definition of trauma. So the way it's defined is an event, a series of events, circumstances, something that happens, it's experienced by a person that either physically or emotionally is harmful to them or it's threatening to them. Now, this can be something that actually happens. It can be something that's perceived as a threat, no matter what it is. It's the effect that it has on them. And sometimes it can have a long-lasting effect on someone's life, impacting their physical, social, emotional well-being. So there's 3 different types of trauma. The first type is what we call acute trauma. So think about just a one-off incident that you probably weren't expecting, something like a car accident, random act of violence, the passing of a loved one. That's what we would call acute trauma. It's typically something that, you didn't anticipate, comes out of nowhere, and it impacts you and it impacts your life. Chronic trauma is something that's a little bit more cyclical, so it's ongoing. Think about, violence in the home, child abuse, bullying. Those are some examples of chronic trauma where it's something that's constantly happening day in and day out, and it's just part of your normal life, just other experiences. Then we have complex trauma, and complex trauma is also, it's sort of like, it's that chronic trauma, but that's also compounded with some different variables. So COVID-19 is a prime example of that. Here we have this pandemic that's happening. A lot of us have experienced a lot of losses, whether that's, now we have housing insecurity, food insecurity, loss of job, loss of connection, loss of life. There's just so much that's gone on, loss of just our normal day-to-day activities. That compounded with other traumas or other things that might be happening, that would feed into that complex trauma. Or you can think about, someone who might be experiencing violence in the home, and there's also food insecurity and some other factors like that. So those are the different types of trauma that impact us and that people experience. And this slide just provides some statistics to help us better understand how this does impact our youth and our young people. So if you take a look at this, nearly 35 million children have experienced at least one event that could lead to some type of childhood trauma. And it says here that 72% of children in the United States will have experienced at least one stressful event before they turn 18. Each year, the number of youth requiring hospital treatment for physical assault-related injuries could fill a seat in 9 stadiums. 19% of injured and 12% of physically ill youth have some PTSD. Or present with that. And then 54% of US families have been affected by some type of a disaster. So these statistics and this information is just telling us that, traumatic events, traumatic experience, crisis, all of these things are very normal and common, and it happens. And, a lot of the times we don't really have control over the events that are taking place or the way that it's impacting us. And for our young people, for our students, and for our kids, it has an impact as well. So the impact of trauma varies from each and every single individual. And this is really important to understand, especially when we're supporting our children and our students, because the way I may experience an incident can be completely different than the way you experienced it. So the two of us could be in the same car and it crashes and we have this accident, depending on me and my own history, my own background, my own social context, that's going to affect me in one way, and it might affect you in a completely different way. So, the exposure to that incident is definitely going to impact everyone individually, just depending on the different variables, right? So social context, your biological and genetic makeup, how do you typically handle stress? Where are you at developmentally? This is important to consider when we're thinking about our students. The way that this affects someone who could be very young, 5, 6, 7, is going to be different than someone who might be 12, 13, 14, 18, or an adult. Also, past exposure to trauma. So have I had traumatic experiences in my past? How have I learned to either adapt or process those incidents? Am I someone who comes from a place where there has been chronic trauma? How about loss? Have I ever experienced a loss in the past? Is this something that's new for me? Is this something that I've been able to deal with before, a process, or is it something that I'm going to need help with? Then we also have our ACEs. I'm not sure how many of you are familiar with what's called our adverse childhood experiences, but your ACE score is basically, it takes a look at all of these different experiences that someone might have in childhood and how that is going to affect the rest of their life as they move forward with some of these adverse experiences. And it's really interesting information. It was a study that was actually done in San Diego, but it takes a look at things that you might experience as a young person that are going to have an effect later on with how you navigate trauma and the impact of that and healing. And then the next thing is the proximity to the traumatic event. So whether I was someone who experienced it firsthand, am I someone who's hearing about the event, secondhand? There's things that we call secondary trauma that also is going to influence the impact that this traumatic event has on someone. So when we think about proximity, we like to think about having like a body of water and a droplet going in. And when that happens, you see the ripples, right? So that ripple effect, that's what proximity and the ripple effect of trauma could be. And a good example of that would be something like 9/11. For a lot of us, it's something that we can remember. We remember where we were, what we were doing when we heard the news, if we saw what was taking place. For a lot of our young people and our kids, that's just a story they've been told. And it's just like us looking back at historical events that maybe we didn't experience, but it's something we've learned about or we've heard about, and we've seen the impact that it's had on someone else. So depending on the proximity to the actual event itself, that can also vary on the level of impact that this incident could have on someone, or the level of support they may need as they move through, or the processing, or how it's affected them in their own normal day-to-day life. This is also important to consider when talking about our kids, and when we cover the ways that they may either behave or what they might express after experiencing a traumatic event. For some of our kids, they like to story tell, and so they'll recount the event over and over again. Or for our little kids, sometimes we'll see role playing where they're acting out what they saw. So it's just important to be really aware of that, because that also can definitely have an impact on, others who are around them, or who might not be as close to the incident, but it can still have an impact. So as I was mentioning earlier, when it comes to trauma, perception is really important here, because, it could be something that we might see as like minimal, whereas to someone else, it can definitely be a traumatic event. So what it says here is, if a child perceives an event as threatening, there's an increased likelihood that the child might be traumatized. So think about falling off of a bike, something like that. A lot of us have done time and time again, but for a small child who just had their training wheels taken off, and then all of a sudden they're off on their own, and then they have that impact, and it's the first time something like that's happened, that can definitely be a traumatic experience. So whether it is or it's not, if someone is perceiving this as to be threatening to them or harmful, it can definitely equate to a traumatic event and a traumatizing experience. So also the perception of these events, that is influenced by the nature of whatever the crisis, whatever the crisis is itself. So the nature of that, how it's impacting them, their community, their family, exposure to crisis, how exposed were they to the event? Have they been exposed to things like this in the past? Also, the relationship with the victims and those who have been heavily or closely impacted. What does that look like? That's also going to speak to the perception that they have of this. And then also watching the adults in their life. How are they responding to the trauma? How are they coping with the trauma? Are they responding in a calm manner? Or, what does their reaction look like? Sometimes that is going to influence the way a child or student might react also. And then also the variety of their own vulnerabilities, the way that they view things, the way that they handle things. All of these things are going to influence the perception that they have of the event that takes place. So media and mental health, especially when it comes to traumatic events, especially when it comes to crisis, this is so crucial to be aware of. These are conversations that we definitely encourage having with our young people, even with ourselves as adults. COVID-19 is a prime example. It's something that is happening. It has definitely shaken up our norm. There's so many unknowns with that, yet we're faced with it, and we see it day to day in our media coverage, on our social media. So unrestricted access to social media can sometimes be really worrisome, especially for our kids. So say there is a tragic accident or an incident that happens in their community. They can just log online sometimes and see details, or they see posts, or even after the event, some of these things are coming up, images, stories, people recounting time and time again. And just the exposure in and of itself to those things can be impactful, can cause trauma, can make things hard as they're trying to process and handle the crisis and move through that. Also, studies are finding that the media exposure can also be associated with PTSD symptoms that are following an event. So sometimes that can even bring up certain emotions and reactions and behaviors just by being exposed to it. I was in a conference not too long ago where they were talking about memes and really paying attention to the memes that are shared, that sometimes our youth might share things that, yeah, they're perceived to be funny, but they have a dark undertone, or they're making light of something that can be serious, and that can also be triggering. So it's just important to be cognizant and aware, how much is on social media, how much we're engaging with social media and, the regular mainstream media, how is that having an influence and an impact? Because it definitely can make things, it can make it worse, or it can just prolong that exposure to the incident that, that they need to work through and get some support with. So I'm going to hand it over to Mindy, and she's going to talk about what you'll see and some of the warning signs.
Okay, hopefully the audio is okay. You guys hear me okay? Okay. All right. So the audio is okay. You guys hear me okay? Oh, it's echoing. Okay. All right. No, okay, it's echoing. So these are some signs of what we might observe in children. So these are some signs of what we might observe in children.
Hey,
Sorry.
Mindy, it's
echoing.
yeah, it's totally echoing. Like
Okay.
like 3 or 4 seconds later. Yeah, it's totally echoing. Like
Okay.
like 3 or 4 seconds later.
Jennifer, I'm gonna let you. Sorry. Can you go ahead? I'm gonna let you. Sorry. Can you go
Yeah,
ahead?
sure, that's no problem. So we're going to cover some of the things that you might see with children who are experiencing crisis or who are being impacted by some type of trauma. And this just kind of covers, this is going to cover everything from our preschool children, so from our young children all the way up to our teenagers, because that's going to look really different depending on age and where they're at developmentally. So for our preschoolers, sometimes there's a lot of separation anxiety. Something may happen and now all of a sudden they're clinging to mom and dad or to their teachers. Also, regression is very normal. You know, this child may have mastered potty training and all of a sudden they're going back, or they're wanting to sleep in their parents' bed, or all of a sudden they're afraid of the dark. Some kids who are walking are now starting to crawl. As I mentioned earlier, you know, role playing, reenacting the traumatic event. Also, something that I think is very common through all stages is new fear. For our kiddos, we see a lot of questions about death and dying. For our children, it's really hard sometimes to gauge, you know, what do they understand about death? How do they comprehend that? For our little kids, sometimes they don't even see it as something that's like final. So how do we have that conversation with them? So for our little kids, we see a lot of these new fears start to come up, sometimes a lot of questions, a lot of things that they, you know, that they're going to need help and support with. And a lot of these things like are completely normal. And I think that is one of the number one takeaways that we have for you is the normalization of some of these responses to grief or to trauma. They're very normal. With our elementary school children, again, you know, worry about what took place, worry if that's going to happen again. Distrusting of adults or circumstances, because, you know, with trauma, as I said, that all of a sudden you lose control over what's happening in your world and in your reality. And sometimes some of these behaviors that we see are just that attempt to try to gain some more control over your life and over what's normal for you. And it is really important that our kids have a level of trust with the adults in their life. If they're experiencing something like this, because that only helps them move through this process. Somatic complaints, some physiological complaints, you know, not sleeping, having nightmares, not being able to eat, having tummy aches. Also changes in school performance. That's something that's common with a lot of our students, not being able to focus in school, not wanting to go to school. The other one is hyperarousal. So, you know, being really jumpy, like the bell goes off and they're jumpy, someone brushes up against them and they're startled. As we start getting into our older years, so with our middle school children, sometimes discomfort with feelings. So troubling thoughts. I know I see a lot of like remuneration of either the event, of their involvement, their proximity to the event. Fears come up time and time again for them. Also, as with our younger children, this is more repeated discussion. So recounting, storytelling, sharing events or pieces of the event that they're aware of, or, you know, constantly having that conversation. Over or underreacting. So same thing, that startle response, easily being startled, avoidance behaviors, you know, things that might remind them of the event or the person that's been impacted, they may avoid those things. For our high schoolers, it looks very similar too. So just this increase in overwhelm and anxiety, fear. With our high schoolers, you tend to see a lot of, in my experience, sometimes guilt. They think about the person depending on how close or what the relationship was. You know, could I have done something? Could I have said something? Sometimes some irritability, maybe mood swings at home with parents, siblings, teachers. Some of the things we want to watch out for, and we'll talk about warning signs, but definitely impulsivity. So all of a sudden they're doing things that seem impulsive, risky. Maybe they're starting to like use substances, they're starting to isolate and withdraw. And then again, the repetitive thoughts are maybe they start making comments about death or dying, and maybe they're trying to make sense of these things. Maybe there's other things we need to be concerned about, but these are some of the reactions that you might see, you know, with your children and with your students. And the number one thing, as I mentioned earlier, is just, you know, making this as normal as possible. for them, or helping them understand that this reaction that they're having is normal. That in and of itself can create a world of difference for someone who is trying to process a traumatic event or a critical incident, because even the reaction in and of itself can be completely out of the blue and be abnormal for them. So short-term distress is almost universal following a traumatic event. And as parents, as teachers, as clinical professionals, the folks that show up for our young kids, this is something that we definitely encourage to help them feel just a little bit more emotionally safe, is normalizing the behaviors and what's coming up. So when this does happen, we do want you, though, just to kind of be aware of, what is helping the impact, what might be making it worse, and some of the things that are making it better, because you want to help them grasp onto healthy coping. And also, as the adult in this person's life, they're looking at us, they're looking to us to see, how are we coping? How are we navigating some of these things? And so it's also important that we model some healthy coping strategies for them, that we also encourage them, that we also have some level of consistency and normalcy for someone who is experiencing this, especially for a young person. And then also, as I mentioned, just watching the symptoms. These are things that over time should start to fade, should start to get a little bit better. But if you notice that they're not, we want to make sure that you yourself are tapping into resources, getting support that you need, and getting them the support that they may need. This is a really great handout, and these slides I know that the principal has, so we can see if maybe they can post these or share this information. But this covers some of the grief responses that you might see. So say, you have a child or you have a student, and all of a sudden you're noticing that they're having anxiety, right, and panic. So the description of what that might be is feeling out of control, being unaware, life is unpredictable. And then there are some things that you can encourage them to do, right? So helping move them away from some of those impulse decisions, encouraging them to spend time with safe folks, with their loved ones, with friends, spending time in nature. So this is a really good resource to have to help you identify what response is coming up for your student or for your child, understanding what that might look like, and then encouraging things that they can do. And I like to say, actually, when we get to some of the responses, it is important to kind of give it back to them, right? So ask them, who are your safe friends? Who do you normally go to, when you're stressed, you need someone to talk to? Do you like to play sports? Like, what are some activities you do to de-stress? And some of that also is part of giving power back to them in a moment where all of a sudden they might be feeling powerless. So giving them choice is also really important, I feel, in instances like this. So some warning signs, these are things we just want you to be a little bit more cognizant of that might indicate that, this has had a really strong impact on my child or on my student. And I feel like maybe they need some additional support. Maybe we need to start exploring some of these things and keeping an eye on them. So if you notice that all of a sudden they are just totally disinterested in the things and the activities they'd like to do before, you notice they start withdrawing, they're starting to self-isolate, they're not wanting to do the things that they did before. Maybe within the family dynamic, they're upset a little bit more. They're not getting along with their siblings. They're not getting along with their parents. Also, again, like that severe decline in their academic performance. So, and it's very normal to talk to a lot of students who have experienced this, who say, I can't focus. I'm really struggling with my homework. I'm really nervous about this test. I know in the children, the teens especially that I've worked with, I've encouraged them to talk to their teacher, let them know what's going on, see if they can get an extension. But if you notice that this is something that is ongoing, or maybe it's having a really severe impact and they're needing so much time and you just don't see them getting back on track, it's something to be, aware of, and maybe look for some extra support for them, or, connect with the school. Also, physical complaints, as I mentioned, a lot of our young people and even adults will say, like, I have a headache, or my stomach hurts, or I'm just, I'm not hungry, or I'm nauseous. Also, that negative coping is something to really watch. And that's what we want to move away from. We really want to encourage our students to and lead them to healthy coping strategies. So if you notice, as I mentioned, the isolation, all of a sudden, maybe they're starting to use substances, they're starting to vape, self-harm, really keep an eye out for that. And that's really a critical time when you're going to want to get some extra support for them, or seek out some resources or talk to someone else. If they're making threats to themselves or others, definitely a red flag to watch out for. Nightmares, these things are typically very common with things like PTSD. So having really strong fears that come up for them. A lot of fear sometimes surrounds this, as I mentioned, happening to someone else. I've been with kids who said, I'm afraid this is going to happen to another teacher of mine or another friend of mine. So really watching and seeing how that fear is playing out. Again, the repetitive play, reenacting the event, telling the event, if it seems like they're starting to become like really obsessive and that's all they're focused on, and it's really hard to, move them away from that, that's something to watch. Also sleeping difficulties, very normal in the beginning, but just keeping an eye on it, is that something that seems to be long-term at this point? Is this something they're really struggling with? Again, sorry, I apologize. I apologize. Hang on one second. Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry about that. But so sorry, I think I skipped a slide. Let me go back. Again, that startle response, if that's something that you're noticing, they're really jumpy, they're really on edge, just at the slightest sound or the bell going off or a door closing. If you notice that they're really agitated, they're really irritable, and some of these things are not seeming to subside. And then again, that regression in behavior, all of a sudden you notice that these milestones or these markers that they've met, they're starting to go backwards. So really clinging on to mom and dad, maybe not wanting to go to school, not wanting to leave the house. All of a sudden now they're afraid of the dark. Just things to really be aware of. And we want you to be cognizant that these are warning signs that maybe the impact has definitely been greater or they're going to need some additional support. We're going to cover pretty briefly just some things to say and not to say. And I will say that the things that are on the don't say this list are very, instinctually, they're common things. I'm sure they're things that I've said in the past, but when you're working with someone or supporting a child or a student or your own child who's going through something tough, we want to still, as we mentioned, give it back, empower them. And sometimes it's so easy to say, like, I know exactly what you're going through, or this happened to me. And even though the intention is to, be sympathetic and join with them, the reality is, even though, I may have, lost a parent at that age or lost a friend, my experience with the grief and loss is definitely going to be completely different than yours. So I can't really speak to that. I can't speak to the emotion you're having or the reaction or how this has impacted you. So a better way would say, can you tell me more about what this has been like for you? Another one is you must have been incredibly angry. We want to avoid giving someone or prescribing an emotion or reaction because we don't know. Maybe that's something that's not a truth for them. So another thing you can say is most people have strong feelings when something like this happens. What has it been like for you? Another one is sometimes what you'll hear labeled as like maybe toxic positivity, where we're telling people just to look at the silver lining. And, sometimes with our own kids, we just want things to be better, or we want them to see the bright side, or we want them to move through the grief and the pain. So we may say something like, this is hard, but it's important to remember that there's good things in life too. That in and of itself can be very hard to hear and to carry, especially when you're going through something like this. Another way would be to say, what kinds of memories do you have about the person who died? And that way you're giving them the opportunity to reflect and to share what they would like. Again, I lost both my parents when I was your age, a very natural, normal thing to say. Something better would be, tell me more about what this has been like for you. We don't want to really compare our loss or our experience to someone else. We want to make sure that we are honoring the loss and the experience and what this has been for them. Another one is you need to be strong now for your family and get a grip on your feelings. That's definitely a big no-no. And that puts a lot of pressure on someone who's not only gone through a traumatic event or who is grieving, but now it's this extra pressure of like, well, maybe I shouldn't express my emotion. I shouldn't express my grief. That's wrong. And we don't want them to do that. We want them to learn how to cope with the emotion, how to feel it. We want them to ultimately learn to process it, because even though these experiences, they're hard and they're terrific, are, terrible, we want them to be able to learn these skills, because it's definitely something that might come up again in life and something that they're going to need to be present for someone else. So a better question would be, how's your family doing? What kinds of concerns do you have about them? And the last one, at least they're no longer in pain. It's another effort to just like focus on the positive side, look at the bright side. And sometimes that's good, but we definitely don't want to do that because they might not be in a place and in a space to do that. So a better question would be, what sorts of things have you been thinking about since this person died? And if you notice, a lot of what we're trying to say is just, give it back to them, open it up to them, let them choose and decide, what they would like to share, their comfort level of sharing. And that just helps empower them a little bit more, especially in a situation where they feel powerless. So here's some tips, for our adults, for our parents, and for our teachers. It's a really important and crucial time for you to reestablish security and stability. And it's important for that child to be able to trust you in these scenarios, as that the adult is the person that they can look to and that they can find support from. So just understanding for ourselves that some of these behaviors are very normal. They're definitely tied to the anxiety, and they can just being sensitive to that and normalizing a lot of what's coming up. Again, helping them manage their feelings by exploring some healthy ways to cope. There's some really great resources online. I know for a lot of our teens, sometimes I'll ask like, hey, have you ever tried journaling? Is that something that you ever considered? Or do you have a safe friend you can talk to? If they're not someone who easily opens up, sometimes just like writing down their thoughts and their feelings and their emotions can be so therapeutic and help them release a lot of what they're experiencing. Also asking them, like, who are your safe people? What is your go-to? And encouraging them to do those things, right? So maybe if they play sports, or they have this teacher that's like a mentor, or they have a friend that they love to talk to, encouraging the healthy coping and kind of helping move them away from things that you might see that look a little bit more maladaptive. Another one, we get asked this a lot. So how do I talk about the traumatic event? How do we address this? Should we sugarcoat things? Should we leave information out? Our recommendation is to be honest in sharing the information and just being cognizant of where they're at developmentally and making sure that you're using appropriate language, appropriate terms. I may view death in a completely different way than my friends or my schoolmates or whoever. So it's just important to be cognizant of that, and to, just making sure that you are being honest, and in any effort that you have, it's to build trust between you and the student or your child. Again, having a concrete safety plan is something that can definitely help. So if it's some type of incident that occurred, whether it's a natural disaster, an incident of violence, going over, what are some of our safety plans? What are some of our safety protocol? Just making sure that they know that their safety is going to be enhanced going forward, that there are some parameters in place for them. Again, engaging them in activities that stimulate the mind and body. If this was someone who really loved to go outside and run, encouraging them to do that, play sports, go to the ocean, the mountains, whatever it may be. Helping them find words. We know for a lot of our young kids, especially, they don't really have a word that matches with the emotion. There's some awesome resources online where there's like a picture, kind of like an emoji that shows an emotion. And then that way they can say like, oh, that's anger, or that's frustration, or that's sad, or that's happy, and that's excitement. So if you're working with a child who's very young, or you have young children, helping them understand language and how to express themselves can definitely be huge and helpful. Also doing activities with them. There's a lot of little kids who may like to color and draw when they're going through things like this. And as adults, it's okay for us to sit down and color and draw with them, or play the video game, or, make a meal together, doing things that help just build some of that strength between the two of you as you're there to be the support. Maintaining usual routines. This is something that is really important, just having consistency, because then again, as I said, the trauma is coming from this place of like loss of control. They didn't see it coming. It's something that just happened. As long as you are maintaining consistency, maintaining a routine, trying to keep as much normalcy as possible for them, this is a huge help, because it helps them have a little bit more of that groundedness. It helps them get a little bit more stability. They see a little bit and experience a little bit more control in their own life. Being aware of our own emotional reactions, and it's okay for us to grieve too. It's okay for us to feel pain. It's okay for us, because we might be moving through this process as well, but just being aware of ourselves, what does our coping look like? Do I need additional support? And making sure that we're reaching out and we're getting the help that we need to help us move through it as well. Allowing children to tell the story as they see it, so they can release the emotion. So as children are relaying what happened and trying to make sense of it, making sure that we're not like filling in the blanks for them, or maybe, it's really heavy and it's really scary, so we're trying to like sugarcoat for them. We want them to express and own the story in the way that they experienced it. reminding ourselves to be calm with our kids, trying to withhold judgment or any type of like shock or reaction. Sometimes that can be more harmful than it is helpful. Making sure that they realize that you're there to help keep them safe moving forward. Boundaries and consistency, that is huge, especially in a time like this, because that's something that a lot of us need when we're moving through a difficult incident or trauma. Again, choice is huge, giving them choice that's going to help them regain a sense of control. A lot of times when someone has experienced a traumatic event or, a loss, we'll see the maladaptive coping, and that's just in an effort to try to regain some control over some element of their life. So there's a lot of things that we can do and tools to help move us into and help support our kids in some more healthy strategies by giving them some of that control back and empowering them. As I mentioned, social media, just being aware of exposure, secondary exposure, giving them the opportunity to use their energy, redirecting their energy in a healthy way. And then the other thing is just asking for help, making sure as the support person, as the parent, as the teacher, that we ourselves are taking care of and getting the support that we need. So briefly, I'm just going to cover a little bit of information about like suicide and suicide prevention, because that can be something tricky to really, talk about or understand, but it is a reality. And so we're just going to cover a few slides here for parents and for teachers, just understanding that it's something that is very serious. It's the second leading cause of death for our young people, ages 10 to 19, is death by suicide. And I just want to cover some things that it's true or false, just to kind of talk about some of the things that we might not realize when it comes to suicide, like what is true and what is false. The first one, talking openly about suicide will cause it to happen. This is a very common fear, and it's not only with suicide. This is a common fear when it comes to talking about substance use, talking about some other unhealthy behaviors. But the reality is that's false. Making sure that you're having conversations about, suicide, about difficult feelings, difficult emotions, that's not going to necessarily cause it to happen. If anything, it is helpful, and it helps open the door for more dialogue and for more support if it's needed. If someone decides they want to take their own life, there's nothing we can do to stop them. That's also false. Someone may make up their mind that that's something that they want to do, but having, the support in place and safeguards in place can be huge in someone who might be contemplating doing something like that. So we want to make sure, again, that we're being open, that we're aware, we're paying attention to some of the behaviors, so that we can show up and we can support them in the best way possible. If someone talks about suicide, they don't need to be taken seriously. We all know that that's false. If someone is making any comments about suicide, I want to end my life, even if they're joking about it, that's something that we definitely take serious. And when it comes to our own kids, when it comes to our students, we really want to be aware that if we start hearing things like that, if they're saying things like that, sometimes after a traumatic event, that might come up. Just making sure that we're paying attention. And if we hear something, that we do take it serious, that we make sure that we have more of a conversation to figure out, where they're really at with this, making sure that we're gathering resources and getting information and support if needed. There are signs we can look for that may indicate someone is considering suicide. Absolutely true. And we will cover some of those signs that someone may be actually considering something like this, so that you can help. Anyone can learn to help someone who is struggling with thoughts of suicide. Absolutely true. There are so many wonderful resources out there. Dee Dee Hirsch has some amazing information. There are wonderful community-based organizations who help with the prevention of suicide, helping us understand what the warning signs are, how to have conversations with someone who might be contemplating suicide, so that we can help support them and really work towards that prevention effort. So here are some of the warning signs and things that you can be aware of. If someone's talking about it, they're joking about it, anything, if they're saying like, I wish I were dead, I were no longer here, these are things we want you to take seriously. Also, artwork, is it things that like are depicting death? Are these common themes that continuously come up about death or dying? Have they tried something like this in the past? Are the comments and the statements they're making about them being, are they helpless, hopeless? Are they saying that people would be better off without them? Negative attitude toward themselves. How do they view themselves? Also, lack of future orientation. If this person just seems like they're very hopeless, or that they feel like they don't have value, these are some common warning signs. Also, if you notice that isolation piece, they're starting to withdraw from their friends, family, activity, they're isolating a lot, that can also be a potential warning sign. If they start giving things away, especially things that were extremely valuable to them, and you notice that they're starting to hand stuff off, give stuff to their siblings, give stuff to their friends, give stuff, just, you know, their possessions or things of value, definitely a huge warning sign. When they know, respect, or idealize someone who's also done that. So that's where we're really cautious about when it does happen within a community, what we like to call postvention, and just taking a look at the community, seeing how that's impacting other students, seeing if there was like a close relationship, or if this is something they'd been contemplating. Sometimes that can also be a warning sign. And then also when the anniversary comes back around of another tragic event that might have had a huge impact on them in the past. So here are things, you know, as teachers, as parents, as caregivers, just keeping your eyes and ears open. So, you know, if they're saying, I wish I were dead, I'm going to end it all, I'm going to kill myself. If this doesn't happen, I'm going to end it. And I know sometimes these are hard things to hear, or, you know, we think maybe they're just kidding. But in these instances, we don't take it lightly. And we know that they're not, you know, we can't not pay attention when things like that are being said. Some less direct clues, but are still clues. You know, life's too hard. You'd be better off without me. I can't take the pain. What's the point? These are still things that we want you to be aware of. Take them as clues, take them serious, and really try to get the help and support that, you know, your child or this person may need. So what can you do as parents? Show you care, listen carefully, listen without judgment, be there for them, be genuine with them. So, you know, I'm concerned about you. How do you feel? Again, try to hand it back to get them to open up to you with what they would like to say, but just being present and showing them that, you know, you do care. And that piece about, you know, being non-judgmental, being open can be huge for them. Asking the question, if this is something definitely serious, even if it's like those more indirect warning signs, be direct with them. You know, are you thinking about suicide? Have an open, honest conversation and ask that question. And then if it's something to where they have a plan, or they're saying it constantly, you know, don't leave them alone, and let them know that, I'm so sorry about that. Let them, it's my older one. Let them know that they're not alone, and please don't leave them alone. And if it's a very serious event, make sure that you're reaching out for help, you know, calling resources, calling authorities, do whatever you can to be there for them. But make sure that you get the help that you need, and you get them the help that they need, especially if it's something that's very serious, or if they do disclose, yes, I am thinking about these things, I do have a plan, or if you're hearing any of those other things from them. Listen, remain calm, express your concern, make sure that you're validating their feelings and their emotions. Again, familiarizing yourself with resources. This slide, we have some awesome resources, and they're going to share some more that your district does have available. Knowing what's out there is huge, so you can provide the help. Also, not being afraid, as we said, to have that conversation directly with them, talk to them about it, be open about it. If they've developed a plan or obtained a means, that's something that you need to know. So making sure that you're asking those questions and getting the right help, and then knowing these risk factors that we covered. So all of these things are definitely very crucial and critical when it comes to supporting your student or your teen who may be considering these things. You know, be there, have this conversation, withhold judgment, but making sure that you're providing support and being very proactive and vigilant if this is coming up. Take immediate action if the youth makes any indication. So if you see anything, they're harming themselves, they're threatening themselves, they have a plan, you can always call 911. You can take them to an emergency room. Please do not leave them alone if there's an indicator that that is something that they're considering doing. Also, follow-up treatment. So making sure that there are supports in place, right? So figuring out if they need some additional support resources in the community. If there's medication, making sure that they're taking their medication, making sure that you're aware of what those side effects might be, maintaining communication, you know, with their physician, with their clinical provider, whoever that might be. And then for you all as parents, as teachers, we are showing up day in and day out for our children. And especially when they're experiencing traumatic events, especially right now when we're in the middle of a pandemic, it's very hard to care for someone else when we're not caring for ourselves. So what we definitely encourage is self-care, taking some time out for you. And it doesn't have to be huge. I know when we hear the word self-care, sometimes we think about, you know, people talk about a spa day or something like that. it doesn't have to be that, go spend time in nature, do what makes you happy or helps you feel fulfilled, spend time with your pets, your children, read a book that you love, take a warm bath, but making sure that you're making time for yourself. And we recommend at least 20 minutes a day to care for you, because you can't give from someone else if you have an empty cup yourself. Also getting creative, and there's some awesome resources out there. GridX is really great, especially for teens. There's a lot of activities there to help them identify some things that they can do for self-care. And then also finding a trusted individual that you can talk to, or maybe journaling yourself, writing down some of these things. But it is really important that you take the time to care for you. So we definitely appreciate you being here with us, but we would like to take some time to answer some questions. I saw some questions popping up in the chat, so I don't know how we would like to facilitate if there's time for a Q&A. But also here's that resource page. And like I said, these slides are available. So if they're able to share these are some resources. There's also some that are on your district's website. There is a survey. Since our program is grant funded, we do ask that you take the survey and just kind of let us know what your thoughts are about this presentation. I think Mindy is going to put that in the chat as well. And then here's my contact information along with Mindy. So if you ever have any questions, or you need any extra help or support, please don't hesitate to reach out to us. And if we have some time for Q&A, that would be
We have a little bit of time. We have about a little bit of time. We have about, I'm hearing an echo on my echo.
Jennifer, maybe stop sharing your screen. Jennifer, maybe stop sharing your screen.
Let me see. I will stop. I will mute.
Okay, is that better? It sounds like that's better. Yeah. We have a little bit of time, and the way I feel, the way we were going to go ahead and facilitate this is that our social workers at the school and Ms. Plummer have been monitoring the chat, and they can ask the questions that were on the chat, and we can see if we can have our representatives from OCDE to help answer these questions. And then Dr. Hodson and I will go ahead and close it out and share some of the resources and programs that we have been offering at Cypress and at Lexington Junior High School to also help mitigate this crisis and to help provide resources for our community.
Yeah, I think before you do that, Jennifer, are you able to look at the chat right now? There was a question. I think really the one question we haven't gotten to is the one that says, how can parents combat the hopelessness felt? Do you see that one?
Yes, I did see that actually as I was scrolling through. And I thought that was an excellent question, because sometimes when our child or our student is expressing that hopelessness, sometimes we as the parent, as the teacher, can feel hopeless as well, because we're like, what now? What do we do? And that can be really challenging. And I would say when someone is expressing that, being there for them, withholding judgment, being present as much as you can. And I would say in those instances, trying as much as you can to stay grounded yourself, because sometimes when we show up and we're like frustrated, or, it's having an impact on us, that can kind of inadvertently impact them. And I would say during those moments, really encouraging finding some additional support. So whether from the school, if there's a counselor, a social worker, but those are the moments where you want to start exploring finding those additional supports for your student and for yourself to help them, learn to process whatever it is that's happening in their life. And I'm sure that the social workers who are present might have some recommendations as well.
I'll share a little bit. I think, with the pandemic, it's something that we haven't gone through before. This is so new. So it can be very difficult to address something like that with our children. And it's okay to let them know that, right? Letting our children know, like, I'm uncertain. I don't know when this will end, because we don't know. So we don't want to give them some, or lying or just coming up with something just to make them feel better. Of course, we want them to feel better, but we also want to be really careful with what we're sharing with them. Being honest to, having those conversations and being open with your children is really important to do. And like Jennifer mentioned, if you're feeling that it's something that is, coming up more than just the casual conversation, perhaps, dig into that a little bit. Maybe it's causing more of an impact than you think. And seek out the support of, a professional if you need to. Seek out, the resources that were provided. Just getting that help and asking those questions to help the entire family if needed. But like mentioned, it's so new to all of us, and we're all just trying to get through this together, and letting your children know that is absolutely okay.
There was a question in the Q&A, and it says, will this presentation or has it been available to the students during classes? I believe they are apt to listen during class time. And I know that Ms. Plummer is on the line and she can share what we have been doing at Lexington Junior High School.
So what I've been doing at Lexington Junior High is I've been talking about how to deal with difficult times, dealing with the pandemic, dealing with stress, loss, and having the students come up with their coping skills, their coping strategies, and the people they can talk to. So having them identify these things, the people that they can reach out to, whether it's family, friends, someone on campus, someone that they trust and feel supported with. I'm going through that with each student, and they're building their wellness plan and coming up their coping strategies. And a lot of students have come up with some great coping strategies, and I'm really proud at what I'm seeing so far. And I really think it's been helpful for the students to get this information.
I think we had one more question, Jennifer. It said, how can we help teenagers verbalize their despair other than implying they want to die?
So if they're having, sorry, I don't think I understand the question fully. So other than them stating that they want to die, or us, making that inference about?
I believe it was other than them, the child, saying that.
So, sorry, can you repeat it?
Yes. How can we help teenagers verbalize their despair other than implying they want to die?
Got it. So sometimes that's difficult, and others can speak to this as well. It can be for someone who's an adolescent, and depending on their age, depending on the language they have, depending on if this is something that, are they normally someone who's open and expressive? Are they normally someone who just processes their thoughts and feelings and emotions internally? And that's where I would say maybe exploring, sitting down, seeing if they're open and willing to have a conversation. If it seems like that's something they don't feel comfortable doing, I always encourage journaling, especially with our teens, because that seems to be extremely helpful. And I've worked with a lot of teens where it's like a brand new concept and they never thought to do it. And they're like, wow, like I feel so much better, because it provides a safe place. And then as they do that, I think they're able to make a little bit more sense of maybe and add and give words to what it is that they're feeling. And that just helps them be able to be more open and articulate it and express it. But I would say exploring some different modalities of ways to get them to, open up and express in a way that's comfortable and that's safe for them. And I would also say leaning into the professionals that you have on campus to help you maybe navigate that if it seems like something that you would be needing support with.
And I just wanted to add one other thing, and Miss Jackie Lopez, I may have you jump in on this as well. We have our counselors, they go through, part of the counseling curriculum is mental health. So oftentimes we don't think of counselors as teachers per se, but they go into the classrooms and do lessons on these types of things. And then Miss Jackie Lopez, she's been working on a way to kind of just reach more students with a similar type presentation for all of our kids. So I'll let you talk about that, Miss Lopez.
Dr. Hudson, just to confirm, you're talking about the workshop? Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah, so something that we will be rolling out at the schools, and this is going to happen across the board. So this isn't just a Cypress thing. This is going to be at all of the schools within the district, junior highs and high schools. One of our wonderful social workers and her intern together, they put this 2-day workshop. It's focused on self-care. Specifically, with this whole pandemic and this new way of learning, the distance learning, it is phenomenal. And we are all super excited to deliver this to the classes. So far, it's been shared. Goodness, I'm not going to remember. Maybe Ms. Bristol Lopez can chime in on this one, but it's been delivered to a few of the schools already, and they've got such great feedback. It's something that will be focused, again, like I mentioned, just coming up with routines, helping helping you as a child just recognizing the stressors, what is filling your bucket, what is draining your bucket. It teaches things like things that they can do within, like, between breaks, between their classes, like chair yoga, mindfulness, deep breathing. It's incredible. So we are all super excited to deliver this. We're just ironing out all of the details right now, trying to figure out in which classes they will be presented. But like I mentioned, I'm super excited. I have an intern at Cypress High School, Angela Nguyen. She's a UCLA grad student. She and I together will be delivering that to Cypress. But like I mentioned, it'll be shared, and Miss Bristol will be giving it as well at Lexington and at Oxford, where she supports both schools. So that is to come.
Okay. Dr. Hodgson, do you see any more questions from the chat box? We wanted to make sure that we left you with some resources and make sure that you're aware that we are recording this and we're going to be posting this on our website. And if we didn't get a chance to ask the question, or you didn't get a chance to ask your question, please fill out that Google form so our staff can get back to you and can reach out to you. Ms. Bristol Lopez, were you going to go ahead and talk about the resources that we have? And then I think we were going to post it.
Yeah, I can talk about it. I think that Jonathan was going to share his screen and just show you the mental health resources page that is up on all of the AUHSD websites currently. So if you were to go to Lexington or Cypress's website, you will see a tab there that says mental health resources, and that has all of our local resources that us as counselors, staff, OCDE, we rely on within the community. I highly encourage you to go on there, familiarize yourself with them, check them out, go to the websites. You can show your children the websites, let them know that this is available, even if maybe they want to check it out on their own time. And we will be constantly adding them, revising them, making sure that that information is current. And I believe that was it in terms of resources. You all are always welcome to reach out to us as social workers and counselors, even if there's just more questions that you have. You know, you're not necessarily looking for services, but you're looking for supports, or can you direct me in the direction of this? We can help with that. So here's an example of the resources that we offer. All of these are current links. Many of them are crisis lines. Some of them are text lines, so that if your child is in distress, they don't know what to do, they don't know who to talk to, they can call the line, they can text the crisis line. It's anonymous, and they're able to get support from trained professionals via that crisis line. I do want to highlight one of the resources that Jennifer mentioned earlier, and that is GritX. This is a phenomenal website that I recommend to all of my students and that I'm working with and parents that I talk to. I just wrote it in the chat. That it was created by therapists. It's an evidence-based website. And if you have questions about mental health, or you're looking for how do I get self-care, what does that look like practically, this website will be a great resource for you, for parents and teens alike.
Thank you, Bristol. And again, thank you, everybody. And we wanna really thank our presenters from OCDE. You saw firsthand how difficult some of this virtual world is for us as we present, you know, from our homes and our kids running around and trying to do things. So we appreciate that you took time out of your evening to be here with us, and we appreciate that the folks at home being here with us, especially for this very important evening. At Lexington Junior High School, we really do get how difficult this is at time. And I'll just speak for myself, being at Lexington Junior High School. And so we are put together an all-day virtual program for our students, and it's called the Lion's Den, because we know how hard it is with parents working, with students not being able to check in. And this is a program that we're offering to any of our Lexington Junior High School students, and it is a supervised all-day program just geared towards making connections and socializing and engaging kids and motivating them to get online and to be a part of a community. If you are interested in this, please feel free to reach out to me. It is during our asynchronous times, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, and it is an all-day virtual program for you, so that you know that your students are being watched and supervised and checked in and communicated with you that they're going to their classes. We really feel the need for this, and we know how important it is right now during this time. So again, thank you. I'm Daniel Klatzker. I'm the principal here at Lexington Junior High School, and I want to thank all of our panelists for coming out this evening. I'll turn it over to Dr. Hodgson, who will give his final goodbyes. And if we didn't get a chance to answer your questions, please fill out that Google Doc so we can get back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Klatzker. And I just wanted to add also what's nice with Lexington Den is we, some of our students are going to be the ones that are going to kind of help go down there and mentor some of their kids as well. So it's a nice partnership. What's one of the things that is one of our goals is to partner and do things more together, since we know it's really the same community. So be on the lookout from both of our schools for additional things. Like I said, we're looking at tonight as our first step, really, as really kind of publicizing some of the things that we have already been doing, but then that we plan moving forward with in greater detail. Before I say goodnight, thanks again to everybody. I'd like to thank our interpreters for being here as well. And I really want to thank Mr. Barba. Many of you know Mr. Barba as our great communicator. So I appreciate your assistance with us. And thanks again for everything. We'll get this out posted and in an email to you guys as well. Thank you and good night.